Chapter 1. The thing she wasn't meant to hear. Susan Ellis had always believed that happiness announced itself. Not loudly, necessarily. Not with fireworks or applause. But with a kind of settled ease. A rhythm. A sense that things were right, or at least right enough. That Saturday morning felt like one of those moments. Brunch had gone long in the way it always did when Susan met her friends. Too much coffee. Shared plates they pretended not to fight over. And the familiar comfort of stories already told but retold anyway. She laughed easily. The sound natural and unforced. Her life, as she saw it, was pleasant. Predictable. Stable. She liked stable. By the time they pulled into the driveway, it was just before noon. Amanda and Abigail were out of the car before Susan had even turned the engine off, already talking over each other about who was meeting whom at the park. Mandy tossed a quick, distracted, "Love you, Mom," over her shoulder. Abby followed with a wave that didn't slow her down. Susan smiled to herself as she gathered her purse. Teenagers in training, both of them. She took pride in how confident they were, how effortlessly social. They were mirrors of her at that age. Something she thought of as both flattering and faintly alarming. As she stepped onto the front walk, she noticed a familiar truck parked along the curb. Her brother-in-law's. She didn't pause. Reggie and his brother spent time together all the time. The basement workshop had become their unofficial refuge. Sports on the television, beers sweating onto coasters Reggie insisted they use, the low murmur of conversation that Susan rarely paid attention to. She went inside, the house greeting her with its usual quiet order. Shoes lined neatly by the door, the faint citrus scent of the cleaner Reggie favored. She set her purse down and headed for the kitchen, already mentally scrolling through dinner options. Then she heard Reggie's voice. Not raised, not angry, frustrated. Susan slowed without realizing she had. It wasn't the words, she couldn't hear them clearly yet, but the tone. Low, tight, restrained in a way that didn't match anything she could remember from recent years. She moved closer to the basement door, her hand brushing the banister. The television murmured in the background, some sports commentator droning on. Then his brother's voice cut through. "Why don't you say anything?" Susan froze. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop. At least, that's what she told herself in the half-second before she leaned closer. "The kids," Reggie said quietly. Her breath caught. The kids were always the reason. The anchor. The shared understanding. Whatever this was about, it had teeth now. There was a pause. Then his brother spoke again, softer but firmer. "I get wanting to stay for them. I do. But you've been miserable for years, Reg. You can't keep doing this to yourself." Susan's stomach dropped, slow and heavy, like a stone sinking through water. Miserable? Years? She pressed her fingers into the wood of the banister, grounding herself. This had to be an exaggeration. Brothers talked dramatically. Men vented. "It didn't mean, I love her," Reggie said. Susan's chest tightened. "I really do. And I love my family." Relief flickered, fragile and brief. "Then what's the problem?" his brother asked. The silence stretched. Susan could picture it. Reggie staring at his hands, jaw set, deciding whether honesty was worth the cost. When he spoke again, his voice cracked something open. "I love her," he said, slower this time. "But I don't think she even likes me anymore." Susan felt the words hit her like a physical blow. "I can't remember the last time she asked about my day and actually listened. It's like a checklist item. She asks, I answer, and that's it. We don't talk. Not really." Her throat closed. "And when we go out with friends," he continued, "at some point I always turn into the joke, and she laughs with them. She never tells them to stop." Susan pressed a hand to her mouth. She remembered those moments. The teasing. The harmless ribbing. The way laughter smoothed over everything. She had never thought to ask how it felt to be the punchline. The basement went quiet again. The television noise felt obscene now, a soundtrack to something unraveling. "What are you going to do?" his brother finally asked. Reggie laughed. There was no humor in it. "I'm doing the only thing I can if I want to stay a father," he said. "When the kids are out of the house, I'll figure out the rest. But right now, keep my head down. I don't rock the boat. And I hope she doesn't get tired of me and take my children from me." Susan's knees weakened. Take his children? This wasn't discomfort. This wasn't dissatisfaction. This was fear. His brother sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. "So you sacrifice your peace and happiness for your family, and your family sacrifices you for theirs." There was a long pause. "Yeah," Reggie said quietly. "Pretty much." Susan stepped back as if she'd been pushed. The house felt different now. Smaller. Sharper. The walls that had always felt protective suddenly seemed complicit, hiding something she should have seen years ago. Her life hadn't been built on partnership. It had been built on assumption. Reggie wasn't steady because he was content. He was steady because he was enduring. And worse, he was afraid of her. Susan turned away from the basement door, her heart racing, her mind spinning. She moved through the kitchen without seeing it, past the life they'd built on routines that no one questioned anymore. She had thought her marriage was safe because it was quiet. Now she understood. Quiet could also mean unheard. And if she didn't figure out what to do next, If she didn't find someone who would tell her the truth instead of what felt comfortable, she was going to lose something she hadn't even realized was slipping away. Chapter 2, The Friend Who Doesn't Sugarcoat. Susan did not sleep that night. She lay beside Reggie, listening to the familiar rhythm of his breathing, each inhale and exhale now sounding like an accusation. He slept on his back, one arm folded neatly across his chest, the other resting close to his side. He looked peaceful, safe. She wondered how long it had been since he'd actually felt that way. Every memory from the basement replayed itself on a merciless loop. His voice, the word miserable, the way he'd laughed without humor, the quiet fear in his confession that had shaken her more than anger ever could have. She hadn't gone downstairs. She hadn't confronted him. Cowardice, maybe, but also instinct. She didn't trust herself not to turn it into defense, to minimize what she'd heard or demand reassurance she hadn't earned. By morning, her chest felt tight with something dangerously close to panic. So she did the only thing she could think of. She called Natalie. Natalie answered on the second ring. "If this is about brunch," she said. "I already apologized for eating the last pancake." "It's not about brunch," Susan said. There was a pause, a subtle shift. "Oh," Natalie said. "That kind of call." "Yes. Give me 10 minutes," Natalie said. "I'll be there." Susan barely had time to change out of her pajamas before Natalie was knocking. She came in carrying 2 coffees and the unmistakable energy of someone who already knew this wasn't going to be a light conversation. They sat at the kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the surface where homework papers and a half-finished craft project still lingered. Natalie pushed one of the coffees toward Susan. "You look like you've been emotionally hit by a bus," Natalie said. Susan stared into the cup. "I overheard Reggie talking to his brother." Natalie's eyebrows lifted. "Overheard how?" "Accidentally," Susan said quickly. "Mostly," Natalie hummed. "That's never good." Susan nodded. "He thinks I don't like him anymore." Natalie didn't respond right away. She took a slow sip of her coffee, studying Susan over the rim of the cup. "And?" she said finally. "And he's staying in the marriage because he's afraid I'll take the kids." Natalie set the coffee down carefully. "Okay, that's not nothing." Susan laughed weakly. "That's one way to put it." Natalie leaned back in her chair. "So what did he actually say?" Susan told her everything. The words came faster once she started, tumbling over each other like they'd been waiting all night for permission to exist. By the time she finished, her throat ached. Natalie was quiet for a long moment. "Do you love him?" Natalie asked. "Yes," Susan said immediately. "Of course I do. Do you show him that?" Susan opened her mouth, closed it again. Natalie didn't look smug. She didn't look pleased. She looked unsurprised. "Susan," she said gently, "you're very good at loving people in theory." That stung. "What does that mean?" "It means you assume love is understood," Natalie said. "You operate from a place of comfort. You stop checking in. You stop being curious." Susan crossed her arms. "That's not fair. I ask about his day." Natalie tilted her head. "Do you listen to the answer?" Susan didn't respond. "Look," Natalie continued, "you've always been like this. You're warm, you're kind, but once something feels stable, you stop nurturing it. You treat people like they'll just stay where you put them." Susan's eyes burned. "I never meant to make him feel invisible." "I know," Natalie said. "That's kind of the problem." Susan laughed again, this time sharper. "You're enjoying this a little." Natalie shrugged. "I enjoy honesty, and I like Reggie." That landed harder than Susan expected. "You like him?" Susan repeated. "Yeah," Natalie said. "He's thoughtful. He remembers things. He shows up. He's been your safety net for 12 years, Susan. And you got used to the landing." Susan pressed her fingers into her temples. "I didn't know he was this unhappy." Natalie's expression softened. "He probably didn't think you wanted to know." The silence stretched between them. "So what do I do?" Susan asked quietly. Natalie leaned forward. "First, stop making this about your guilt. That'll just turn into defensiveness." Susan winced. "Okay." "Second," Natalie said, "you talk to him, not to fix it, not to reassure yourself, to understand." Susan nodded slowly. "And third?" she asked. Natalie smiled, just a little. "You prepare yourself for the possibility that he's been hurting longer than you want to admit, and that rebuilding trust is going to take time." Susan swallowed. "What if he's already checked out?" "Then you fight for him," Natalie said simply. "Like you expect people to fight for you." The words settled deep. Natalie stood, gathering her things. "Call me after you talk to him." Susan hesitated. "What if I mess it up?" Natalie laughed. "You will. Growth is messy. Just don't make it about you." After Natalie left, Susan stood alone in the kitchen, the house too quiet again. She thought about Reggie downstairs, probably organizing something that didn't need organizing, because that's what he did when his mind was crowded. For the first time in years, she didn't assume he'd be there waiting when she was ready. She realized something uncomfortable and necessary. Love, unattended, didn't stay warm. And if she wanted her marriage to survive, not as a habit, not as a convenience, but as a choice, She was going to have to relearn how to see the man she'd stopped really looking at. Chapter 3, Reggie, Unfiltered. Reggie Ellis had perfected the art of being useful. He woke up at 5:30 every weekday morning, not because he had to leave the house that early, but because the quiet belonged to him then. No competing voices, no expectations beyond the ones he placed on himself. He showered, shaved, dressed, and made coffee strong enough to shake the fog loose from his thoughts. He emptied the dishwasher while the house still slept. It wasn't resentment that guided his hands, at least not at first. It was habit, responsibility, the quiet pride of knowing things were handled before anyone noticed they needed handling. By the time he left for work, the house looked the way Susan liked it. Clean counters, straightened throw pillows, lunches already packed in the fridge, labeled in his tidy handwriting. No one commented on it. At work, Reggie was reliable in the same way. He didn't posture. He didn't complain. He showed up, did his job, and stayed late when it was necessary. His boss trusted him because he never made things harder than they needed to be. Ellis, a coworker, called as Reggie walked past the break room. "You're a machine, man. Ever take a day off?" Reggie smiled politely. Someone's got to keep things moving. It was a joke. Everyone laughed. No one noticed that he wasn't joking. The truth was, Reggie didn't know what he would do with a day off. He wasn't sure what he wanted anymore, and that uncertainty made rest feel indulgent. Dangerous, even. Idle time had a way of letting thoughts wander places he preferred they didn't go. Like how lonely he felt in a house full of people. Or how often he felt like an accessory in his own marriage. He drove home that evening on autopilot, mentally ticking through the small things he needed to take care of. Pick up dry cleaning. Fix the loose hinge on the pantry door. Look up the schedule for Mandy's school event Susan had mentioned in passing. Susan was in the kitchen when he walked in, scrolling through her phone. "Hey," she said, looking up briefly. "Dinner's almost ready." "Smells good," Reggie replied. It did. Susan was a good cook. Always had been. She cooked the way she approached most things, with confidence and the assumption that it would turn out fine. They ate as a family, the four of them around the table. Mandy talked about a friend's drama at school. Abby chimed in with her own version of the story, correcting details with theatrical seriousness. Susan laughed, engaged, asking questions. Reggie listened. He always did. At one point, Mandy rolled her eyes and said, "Dad wouldn't get it anyway." Susan laughed automatically. That's true. It was quick, casual, unthinking. Reggie felt something inside him tighten. He smiled anyway. "Probably not," he said mildly. "But I can pretend." Mandy shrugged, already moving on. Susan didn't notice. After dinner, Reggie cleared the table, loaded the dishwasher, wiped the counters. Susan sat with the girls on the couch, flipping through something on her phone they wanted to see. From the kitchen, Reggie watched them. The three of them fit together easily, their voices overlapping, their laughter unforced. He felt like a guest in the room, hovering just outside the circle of something warm. He didn't resent Susan for it. That was the strange part. He loved her. He admired her ease, her social grace, the way people gravitated toward her. He just wished, sometimes, that she would turn that attention toward him without being prompted. Later that evening, Susan's phone rang. She stepped into the hallway to take the call, her voice dropping into the animated cadence she used with friends. Reggie sat on the couch, television on but not really watching. He muted it when he heard his name. "Oh, Reggie," Susan said into the phone, laughing. "You know how he is." Reggie closed his eyes. He knew that tone, the affectionate dismissal, the way his quirks became shorthand for humor at his expense. When Susan came back, she didn't mention it. He didn't ask. That night, lying in bed beside her, Reggie stared at the ceiling. Susan turned toward him, her hand brushing his arm. "You okay?" she asked. "Yes," he said automatically. She nodded, satisfied, and rolled away. Reggie stayed awake long after her breathing evened out. He thought about the conversation in the basement with his brother earlier that week. How the words had spilled out of him once he'd started. How exposed he'd felt afterward. Weak. He hated that fear had become such a defining force in his life. Fear of losing his daughters. Fear of being alone. Fear that if he voiced his unhappiness, he'd be punished for it. So he did what he'd always done. He pulled back. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone could accuse him of. He still showed up. Still handled the logistics. Still did the things that kept the family functioning. He just stopped offering the parts of himself that weren't required. At breakfast the next morning, he didn't ask Susan about her plans for the day. At dinner, he didn't volunteer commentary unless someone spoke directly to him. When Susan told a story about him to friends later that week, he smiled politely instead of correcting it. Susan noticed, eventually, it wasn't one thing. It was the absence of many small ones. The way he no longer lingered in rooms. The way he seemed harder to reach, like he was standing just out of conversational range. "Are you mad at me?" she asked one night, confused. "No," Reggie said honestly. He wasn't mad. He was tired. And for the first time in years, He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep carrying a marriage that didn't seem to notice the weight he bore. He loved Susan. That hadn't changed. But love, he was learning, wasn't the same as being chosen. And he was no longer certain he was. Chapter 4. Trying and failing gracefully. Susan did not ease into change. She lunged at it. By Monday morning, she had a plan. Or rather, several loosely connected ideas she had bundled together and labeled effort. Natalie's voice echoed in her head. Don't make this about your guilt. But guilt was loud. And Susan had always been the kind of person who responded to discomfort by doing something. Anything. Reggie noticed immediately. She woke up before her alarm, heart racing, and turned toward him in bed with what she hoped was casual warmth. Good morning, she said brightly. Reggie blinked, startled. Morning. She watched his face too closely, searching for a reaction. When none came, she pressed on. Did you sleep okay? Yes. Any weird dreams? He paused. No. Susan nodded too enthusiastically. Good. That's good. She lay there for another second, waiting for him to ask something back. When he didn't, she pushed herself out of bed, the momentum faltering but not stopping. Downstairs, she made breakfast. Not the usual quick toast or yogurt. Eggs, bacon, toast cut neatly in half. She even set the table. Reggie came in, slowing when he saw it. Is it a special occasion? He asked. Susan laughed. Do I need one to make my husband breakfast? No, Reggie said carefully. Just not typical. Well, she said, sliding a plate toward him. I'm full of surprises. He smiled, polite but uncertain. They ate mostly in silence. Susan resisted the urge to fill it with chatter. Natalie had said to listen, so Susan waited, hoping Reggie would say something meaningful if given the space. He did not. At work, Susan texted him twice. Hope your morning's going well. Don't forget you have that thing later. Good luck. Reggie responded with thumbs-up emojis. She stared at the screen, frustrated. She had expected more. Gratitude, warmth, something to indicate that her effort was landing the way she intended. That evening, she decided on a bigger gesture. Let's go out Friday night, she said as they cleaned up dinner. Reggie looked at her. The girls. I'll call my mom. He hesitated. You don't have to. I want to, she said quickly. Just us. Reggie nodded. Okay. Susan exhaled, relieved. This was working. It had to be. Friday night came and Susan dressed with care. Not overly dressed. She didn't want to seem like she was trying too hard, but intentional. She chose a dress Reggie had once complimented years ago, back when compliments were frequent enough to remember. Reggie noticed. You look nice, he said. Her chest warmed. Thank you. They drove to the restaurant in silence, the air between them tight with expectation. Susan fidgeted, rehearsing what she wanted to say. She'd imagined this moment all week. Meaningful conversation, reconnection, maybe even laughter that felt earned. When the waiter took their order, Susan leaned forward. So, she said, tell me about your week. Reggie looked at her, surprised. It was fine, he said. Busy. What kind of busy? She asked, smiling encouragingly. He shrugged. Work stuff. Susan waited. He took a sip of water. Why are you looking at me like that? Like what? Like I'm about to take a test. She laughed nervously. I'm just interested. He studied her for a moment. You've always been interested. The words landed wrong. Susan's smile faltered. I mean, more interested. Reggie nodded slowly. Okay. He told her about a project at work, his voice measured, careful. Susan listened, really listened, but she also interrupted twice with suggestions he hadn't asked for. Old habits surfaced before she could stop them. When he finished, she leaned back, satisfied. See? That wasn't so hard. Reggie's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Dinner continued awkwardly. Susan filled silences with updates about the girls, about Natalie, about a funny thing she'd seen online. Reggie responded politely, but the ease she'd imagined never arrived. Halfway through the meal, Susan reached across the table and touched his hand. I feel like we've been disconnected lately, she said softly. I want to fix that. Reggie pulled his hand back gently, resting it in his lap. I didn't say anything was broken. Susan blinked. I know, you seem very focused on fixing, he continued. I'm not sure you're hearing what the problem is. Her stomach dropped. Then tell me. He hesitated, glancing around the restaurant. This doesn't feel like the place. Susan nodded quickly. Okay, later. At home. The drive back was quieter than the drive there. At home, the house was dark, her mother long gone, the girls already asleep. Susan kicked off her shoes, heart pounding. Reggie set his keys down carefully. So, she said, talk to me. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. You're trying very hard. I am, she said defensively. Isn't that what you want? I want to know why now, he said. Susan froze. What do you mean? You didn't wake up last Monday suddenly realizing you wanted to reconnect, Reggie said calmly. Something changed. Susan opened her mouth, then closed it again. She hadn't planned for this part. I overheard you, she admitted finally. In the basement. With your brother. Reggie's face went still. How much did you hear? Enough. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with things neither of them had wanted exposed. So this, he said slowly, gesturing between them, is because you feel bad. No, Susan said quickly. It's because I care. He tilted his head. Those aren't the same thing. The words stung because they were true. I didn't know you were hurting, she said. If I had, you did know, Reggie said gently. You just didn't think it was serious enough to require change. Susan's eyes burned. That's not fair. It's accurate, he replied. And I'm not angry about it. I just don't want performative effort. Performative? She echoed. Yes, he said. Big gestures that disappear when the panic fades. Susan sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. I'm trying. I know, Reggie said. And I appreciate it. I just need to trust that it's real. She looked up at him. How do I prove that? Reggie thought for a moment. Stop trying to impress me. Start trying to understand me. Susan nodded slowly. This wasn't going to be a single conversation fix, or a date night solution, or breakfast on a Monday morning. It was going to require patience, a skill she hadn't realized she'd stopped practicing. And as uncomfortable as that realization was, it was also clarifying. Because for the first time, Susan understood something important. Effort wasn't loud. And love wasn't something you demonstrated once and assumed would last. Chapter 5. The children see more than you think. Susan first realized something was wrong when Mandy stopped asking for rides. It wasn't dramatic. There was no announcement or confrontation. Mandy simply started coordinating everything through friends' parents, biking places she would normally have asked Reggie to drive her, or waiting until Susan was already heading out before mentioning she needed to be somewhere. At first, Susan assumed it was independence. Teenagers pulled away. That was normal. But then Abby followed suit, lingering longer in her room, headphones in, door closed just a little more firmly than before. The house had grown quieter. Not the peaceful quiet Susan preferred, the efficient, tidy kind, but a watchful one. The kind that felt like people were listening for something they didn't quite understand yet. One Tuesday evening, Susan found Abby at the kitchen table, homework spread out but untouched. She was staring at the page with the same expression Reggie wore when he was thinking too hard about something he didn't want to name. Everything okay? Susan asked gently. Abby shrugged. I guess. Susan sat across from her. That usually means no. Abby glanced toward the hallway, lowering her voice. Are you and Dad mad at each other? Susan's heart stuttered. Why would you think that? You don't joke anymore, Abby said. And Dad's quieter. Susan swallowed. We're just tired. Abby frowned. You're always tired. It was said without accusation, just observation. Later that night, Susan watched Reggie help Mandy with a science project. He was patient, steady, explaining things carefully while Mandy nodded along, half listening. At one point, she snapped, Never mind. I'll just figure it out myself. Reggie leaned back slightly. Okay. Mandy looked up, surprised. You're not going to argue? No, he said calmly. You said you wanted to figure it out. She stared at him for a second, then turned back to her project, unsettled. Susan felt a twist of unease. Reggie had always been accommodating, but this felt different, not supportive, withdrawn. That realization sat heavy with her all evening. The next afternoon, Susan got a call from the school counselor. It wasn't alarming. It wasn't urgent. It was framed as a check-in. Nothing serious, the counselor assured her. But Mandy mentioned feeling uncertain at home. I just wanted to make sure everything's okay. Susan thanked her, promised to follow up, and hung up with shaking hands. That night, she knocked on Mandy's door. Can I come in? She asked. Mandy hesitated, then shrugged. Sure. Susan sat on the edge of the bed. Your counselor called me. Mandy groaned. Great. She wasn't mad, Susan said quickly. She just wanted to make sure you're okay. Mandy picked at the comforter. I am. Mostly. Susan waited. It's just, Mandy said slowly. Dad seems sad. Susan's chest tightened. Sad how? Like he's trying not to be in the way, Mandy said. Like when people say sorry even when they didn't do anything wrong. Susan closed her eyes briefly. Did I do something? Mandy asked, her voice small. No, Susan said immediately. No, sweetheart. This isn't about you. Mandy nodded, but she didn't look convinced. I just don't like it when you and Dad don't talk, she said. It feels like I have to choose who to be normal around. Susan reached for her hand. You don't have to choose. Mandy squeezed her fingers. Then please talk to him. That night, Susan and Reggie sat on opposite ends of the couch, the television playing quietly between them. We need to talk, Susan said. Reggie nodded. I know. She took a breath. The girls are noticing. His jaw tightened. I was afraid of that. Mandy thinks she did something wrong, Susan said. Abby's worried we're mad at each other. Reggie closed his eyes briefly. That wasn't my intention. I know, Susan said. But intention doesn't change impact. He looked at her then. really looked at her. So what are we doing? Susan swallowed. I don't want them growing up thinking this is what marriage looks like. Two people avoiding each other politely. Reggie leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Neither do I. She hesitated, then said the thing she'd been avoiding. Are you staying because of them? Reggie didn't answer right away. Yes, he said finally. And because I hoped, maybe things would change. Susan nodded, tears threatening. They're changing. Or at least I want them to. He studied her carefully. Why? Because I finally see what we've been teaching them, Susan said. That one person carries the weight while the other assumes it will always be carried. Reggie exhaled slowly. I don't want to be the reason our daughters think love means endurance, she continued. I don't want Mandy laughing along someday when someone makes her partner the joke. I don't want Abby thinking it's normal to be afraid of asking for more. Reggie's eyes softened. They learned those things by watching us. Yes, Susan said. And I want them to see us fix it. He was quiet for a long moment. I can't do this halfway, Reggie said finally. Not anymore. I don't want halfway, Susan replied. I want honest, even if it's uncomfortable. He nodded slowly. Okay. They sat there, not touching, but aligned in a way they hadn't been in years. The next morning, Susan gathered the girls at the table. Your dad and I are working on some things, she said carefully. Nothing is broken. No one's leaving. But we're learning how to be better at listening. Mandy eyed them skeptically. Like, therapy listening? Susan smiled. Maybe. Reggie cleared his throat. We just want you to know this isn't because of you. Abby nodded. Okay. Mandy studied them both. So, does that mean family dinner on Fridays again? Susan glanced at Reggie. He smiled faintly. Yeah, it does. The girls exchanged looks, hopeful, cautious, but relieved. Later, as Susan watched Reggie laugh quietly with Abby over something small and unimportant, she felt a bittersweet ache. The girls had seen the distance before she had. And now that they were watching closely, Susan knew something else too. This wasn't just about saving her marriage. It was about choosing, every day, to model the kind of love she wanted her daughters to believe in. Chapter 6, The Fight That Finally Happens. The fight did not arrive the way Susan expected. There was no slammed door. No raised voices echoing through the house. No dramatic declaration that something was wrong. It arrived quietly, on a Wednesday evening, disguised as exhaustion. Susan was folding laundry in the living room, the television murmuring in the background. Reggie sat in the armchair, scrolling through his phone, his posture relaxed in the way of someone who had already checked out for the night. The girls were upstairs. The house was calm. Too calm. Susan folded one of Reggie's work shirts, smoothing the sleeves with care. She hesitated, then set it aside instead of placing it neatly on the stack. Can I ask you something? She said. Reggie didn't look up. Sure. Are you happy? He stopped scrolling. The pause stretched longer than was comfortable. With what? He asked finally. With us, Susan said. With me. Reggie set his phone down slowly, as if it suddenly carried weight. I don't know how to answer that, he said. Susan's chest tightened. Try. He leaned back in the chair, eyes on the ceiling. I'm content in the sense that nothing is actively on fire. That's not an answer. It's the most honest one I have, he said. Susan folded another shirt, hands trembling. Do you still want to be married to me? Reggie looked at her then. Really looked at her. That depends, he said. On what? On whether being married to you means being invisible, he replied. The word landed like a crack in glass. I don't think you're invisible, Susan said quickly. I know, Reggie said. That's part of the problem. Susan stood up, the laundry forgotten. Explain that. You don't see me because you assume I'm fine, he said. Because I don't complain. Because I handle things. You think absence of conflict equals happiness. That's not fair, Susan said. I check in. I ask how you're doing. You ask, Reggie agreed. You don't listen. Susan opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. He went on, his voice steady but strained. When I tell you about work, you multitask. When I talk about something I'm interested in, you redirect. When I'm quiet, you assume it's peace instead of fatigue. Susan shook her head. I didn't know. You didn't ask, he said. The words hit harder than shouting ever could have. I didn't think I had to, Susan said softly. We were married. I thought we were okay. Reggie leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Okay is a low bar, Susan. Something in his tone broke something in her. I never wanted you to feel like you had to endure me, she said, tears spilling over now. I never wanted to be someone you survived. I know, Reggie said, but intention doesn't erase impact. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Susan wiped her face. Why didn't you tell me? I did, Reggie said quietly. Just not in ways you recognized. She stared at him. When I stopped initiating conversations, he said. When I stopped suggesting things we could do together. When I let jokes land instead of pushing back. Those weren't accidents. Susan's stomach churned. I thought you were just Easygoing. Reggie gave a short, humorless laugh. That's what everyone thinks. Do you want to leave? Susan asked, barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. I don't want to abandon my family, he said finally. But I also don't want to disappear inside it. Susan nodded, tears falling freely now. I don't want that either. Then something has to change, Reggie said. Not for a week. Not until things feel comfortable again. I know, Susan said. I'm listening. He looked skeptical. Are you? Yes, she said firmly. Tell me what you need. Reggie closed his eyes for a moment. I need to feel chosen. Not assumed. Not managed. Chosen. Susan stepped closer. How? I don't want to be the default, he said. The one who fills in gaps. I want you to want me in the room. Her throat tightened. I do. Then act like it, he said. Ask me things you don't already know the answers to. Let me be complicated. Let me be upset without fixing it. Susan nodded, absorbing each word. And stop laughing when people make me the joke, he added quietly. That hurts more than you realize. Her face crumpled. I'm so sorry, he exhaled slowly. I'm not saying this to punish you. I'm saying it because if I keep swallowing it, I won't recognize myself anymore. Susan reached for his hand, hesitating. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose me, Reggie replied. They stood there, the space between them heavy with truth. This is the fight, isn't it? Susan said weakly. The one we've been avoiding. Reggie nodded. Yeah. Susan laughed softly through her tears. It's quieter than I expected. It's louder inside, he said. She squeezed his hand. I'm willing to do the work. He met her gaze. I need to see it. They didn't hug. They didn't resolve everything. There was no sudden rush of romance or reassurance. But when they went to bed that night, Susan noticed something small and significant. Reggie didn't turn away. He stayed facing her, awake, present. And for the first time in years, the silence between them didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like space where something honest might finally grow. Chapter 7, Learning Each Other Again. The next phase of their marriage began without ceremony. No declarations. No lists taped to the refrigerator. No sudden reinvention. Just a series of small, uncomfortable adjustments that felt less like romance and more like learning how to use muscles they hadn't stretched in years. On Thursday morning, Susan stopped herself before asking Reggie about his day. Instead, she waited until he had finished his coffee and was tying his shoes by the door. What are you looking forward to today? She asked. Reggie paused, one shoe half on. That's a new question, he said. Susan smiled nervously. Is that okay? He considered it. Yeah, it is. He thought for a moment. I have a meeting with a client who actually listens. That'll be nice. Susan nodded. Why? He glanced up at her, surprised by the follow-up. Because I don't have to translate everything into something palatable. I can just be direct. That sounds refreshing, she said. It is, he agreed. When he left, Susan realized her chest felt lighter. Not because she'd done something impressive, but because she'd resisted the urge to redirect the conversation to herself. That night, they sat at opposite ends of the couch, the television on but ignored. Susan cleared her throat. Can I try something? Reggie raised an eyebrow. That depends. Is it an experiment? Yes. He smiled faintly. Proceed. I'm going to ask you something, she said. And I'm not going to interrupt, fix, or explain it away. I'm just going to listen. Reggie leaned back. Okay. What do you miss? She asked. He didn't answer right away. I miss being funny, he said eventually. Not dad funny. Just me funny. Susan's brow furrowed. You're still funny. He shook his head. Not the way I used to be. I stopped joking because I got tired of being the joke. Susan winced but stayed quiet. I also miss feeling like my presence matters, he continued. Not just what I provide. Susan nodded slowly. And, he added, glancing at her, I miss you noticing things without me pointing them out. She swallowed. Like what? Like when I'm tired, he said. Or when something's bothering me. You used to be really good at that. Susan felt the truth of it settle in her chest. I want to be good at it again, she said softly. Reggie studied her. Then don't rush it. The following weekend, they attempted something new. Not a date. Not a family outing. A walk. Just around the neighborhood, no destination, no time limit. Susan left her phone on the kitchen counter. Reggie noticed. That's intentional, she said quickly. He smiled. I figured. They walked side by side at first, the conversation hesitant. Then Susan asked about a book she'd seen on his nightstand. You haven't asked about that in years, he said. I know, she admitted. What made you pick it up? He told her. About a coworker. About an idea that had stuck with him. About a version of himself he'd quietly wondered about but never pursued. Susan listened. Really listened. At one point, she laughed. Not at him but with him. And the sound startled them both. Reggie stopped walking. There it is. There what is? Susan asked. That laugh, he said. I've missed that. Her eyes burned. I didn't realize I'd stopped. I did, he said gently. They walked a little closer after that, their arms brushing occasionally, the contact tentative but welcome. At home, Mandy watched them through the window. Are they holding hands? She whispered to Abby. Abby squinted. I think so. The girls exchanged a look, hopeful, cautious. Susan and Reggie didn't notice. They were too busy negotiating the fragile new territory of shared space. Later that night, Susan tried to kiss him. Not dramatically, just a soft, tentative press of her lips against his cheek as they brushed their teeth side by side. Reggie stilled. She pulled back immediately. Too soon. He shook his head. No. Just unexpected. I can stop, she said quickly. I don't want you to stop, he replied. I just want to know it's not obligation. Susan met his gaze in the mirror. It's not. He nodded. Okay. They didn't rush. The kiss that followed was careful, exploratory, more about reassurance than passion. It was perfect. Over the next few days, they stumbled. Susan interrupted more than once. Reggie withdrew when conversations hit something raw. They misread each other's moods. Old habits surfaced. But this time, they named it. I'm doing the thing, Susan said one afternoon, catching herself mid-lecture. Reggie smiled. You are. And you stopped. That counts. I don't want credit, she said. I want consistency. He nodded. Then keep doing that. One evening, Susan found Reggie in the garage, tinkering with something she didn't recognize. What's that? She asked. He glanced up. Something I've been meaning to fix. She leaned against the doorframe. Do you want help? He smiled. I think I just want company. So she stayed. She asked questions she didn't fully understand the answers to. She let silence exist without filling it. Later, over dinner, Susan did something she hadn't done in years. She teased him gently, affectionately, privately. Reggie laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. Careful, he said. I might start thinking you like me. She smiled. I do. Very much. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Good. That night, as they lay in bed, Susan reached for his hand. He didn't hesitate. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For staying present, he replied. It would have been easier to panic. Susan squeezed his fingers. I'm done choosing easy. He turned toward her. So am I. The work wasn't finished. They both knew that. But as Susan drifted toward sleep, she realized something important. They weren't trying to return to who they used to be. They were learning who they were now and choosing each other in that space. And for the first time in a long while, that choice felt mutual. Chapter 8. Being seen in public. Susan hadn't realized how much of her marriage existed in private until it was tested in public. It happened on a Saturday night. At a friend's birthday dinner she would normally have looked forward to without hesitation. The group was familiar, couples they'd known for years, people who had watched their children grow, who shared inside jokes that had calcified into tradition. Susan had laughed along with those traditions for a long time. This time she was nervous. Reggie noticed as she checked her reflection in the mirror for the third time. You okay? He asked. Yes, she said quickly. Just thinking. He nodded. Me too. The restaurant was loud and warmly lit, the kind of place that encouraged people to talk over one another. They slid into their seats, greeted with hugs and teasing commentary about being the dependable ones. Someone raised a glass. Toasts were made. Food arrived. Susan relaxed a little. Then it happened. One of the husbands, Mark, she thought vaguely, leaned across the table and said with a grin, So, Reggie, still the household pack mule? A few people chuckled. Susan felt it immediately, that familiar pull to laugh along, to keep things easy. The muscle memory of smoothing moments over before they could turn awkward. She glanced at Reggie. His smile was polite, automatic, but his shoulders had gone slightly rigid, his eyes already drifting away from the table. Something inside Susan hardened, not with anger, but resolve. She set her fork down. Why would you say that? She asked calmly. The laughter faltered. Mark blinked. I was joking. I know, Susan said. I just don't get the joke. The table went quiet in a way that made everyone suddenly very interested in their drinks. Reggie turned toward her, surprise flickering across his face. Susan continued, her voice steady. Reggie does a lot for our family. We both do. I don't think that's funny. Mark flushed. I didn't mean. I know, she said again, softer this time. But let's not make him the punchline. Someone cleared their throat. Conversation shifted, awkwardly at first, then with relief. Reggie didn't speak for a moment. Under the table, Susan felt his hand find hers. He squeezed. Later, in the car, he let out a slow breath. You didn't have to do that, he said. I wanted to, Susan replied. He glanced at her. That's different. She smiled. I know. At home. The adrenaline wore off, leaving behind something gentler. Reggie leaned against the counter while Susan kicked off her shoes. That meant more than you realize, he said quietly. Susan met his gaze. I'm starting to realize how many times I didn't. He nodded. I didn't want to be defended like a child. I just wanted to be considered. She stepped closer. I see you. He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing the words. I believe you, he said. The next test came sooner than Susan expected. A week later, she met Natalie for coffee. They chatted about the girls, about work, about nothing in particular. Then Natalie smirked. So, she said, how's Reggie handling the new and improved Susan? Susan raised an eyebrow. What's that supposed to mean? Natalie shrugged. You know, he's probably enjoying the attention. Susan felt a familiar instinct rise, to deflect, to joke. Instead, she shook her head. That's not fair. Natalie blinked. Excuse me? He's not enjoying attention, Susan said. He's enjoying being respected. There's a difference. Natalie smiled slowly. Look at you. Susan smiled back. I know. At home, Reggie noticed the changes too. Not just in Susan's words, but in her posture, her presence. She stood closer in groups. She waited for him to finish speaking. She no longer used him as conversational shorthand. One evening, as they watched television together, Reggie turned to her. You're different, he said. Susan tensed. Is that bad? No, he said quickly. It's grounding. She relaxed. I was afraid it would feel fake. It doesn't, he said. It feels intentional. The girls noticed, too. Mandy watched Susan shut down a comment from a relative at a family gathering and later said quietly, that was cool. Abby started sitting closer to Reggie during movie nights again, her head resting against his shoulder. Susan watched these moments with a strange mix of pride and regret. She couldn't change the years she'd missed, but she could change what her daughters were seeing now. That night, Susan found Reggie in the backyard, staring up at the stars. Hey, she said softly. He smiled. Hey. She joined him, the quiet stretching comfortably between them. I'm sorry it took me so long, she said. He shook his head. I don't want to live in too late. She nodded. Neither do I. He turned toward her. I feel lighter, not because everything's fixed, but because I don't feel alone in it anymore. Susan reached for his hand. You aren't. He squeezed her fingers. I know. For the first time in years, Reggie felt something settle in his chest. Not hope exactly, trust. And Susan realized something important, standing there under the open sky. Love wasn't just about how you spoke to someone when you were alone. It was about who you stood beside loudly, clearly, without hesitation, when the world was watching. Chapter 9, A Marriage, Chosen. The recommitment didn't happen all at once. It arrived in pieces, quiet decisions made repeatedly, often without witnesses. Susan noticed it first in the mornings, when she no longer rushed past Reggie on her way to the day. She lingered, asked questions she hadn't known to ask before, let answers land without redirecting them. Reggie noticed it in the evenings, when Susan sat beside him instead of near him, when she waited for his reaction instead of filling the space, when she laughed in ways that felt private again. They were still imperfect, still human, but they were present. One Sunday afternoon, weeks after the dinner party, Susan found Reggie in the basement workshop. The television was off. The space smelled faintly of sawdust and oil. He was sanding a piece of wood, movement steady, focused. She leaned against the doorframe. Can I interrupt? He glanced up, smiling. For you? Always. She stepped inside. I've been thinking. He chuckled. That's never ominous. I mean it in a good way, she said. About us. He set the wood aside. Okay. Susan took a breath. I don't want our marriage to be something we default into. I want it to be something we actively choose. Reggie nodded slowly. I like the sound of that. I know I can't undo the years where I assumed you'd always be okay, she continued. But I want to be better going forward. Not perfect, just intentional. He studied her face, searching for something. What does that look like to you? It looks like checking in even when things seem fine, she said. It looks like asking what you want instead of assuming I know. It looks like standing beside you, everywhere. He smiled, small but genuine. That's a good start. She hesitated, then added, and it looks like letting you be unhappy sometimes without panicking. Reggie laughed softly. That might be the hardest part. They stood there, the quiet, comfortable. I want to stay married to you, Susan said finally. Not because it's safe, not because it's familiar, but because I want you. Reggie felt something in his chest loosen, a knot he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. I want that too, he said, and I want to believe it won't disappear when things feel settled again. Susan nodded. Then don't let me get lazy. He raised an eyebrow. You're giving me permission to call you out? Yes, she said without hesitation. I trust you. That night, they told the girls they were going away for a weekend. Just the two of them. Mandy blinked. Like, on purpose. Susan laughed. Yes, on purpose. Abby smiled. Good. The trip wasn't extravagant. A small town, a quiet hotel, long walks and slow dinners. They talked about the past without rewriting it and about the future without scripting it. One evening, sitting on a bench overlooking the water, Reggie said, I used to think love was about endurance. Susan looked at him. What do you think now? I think it's about participation, he said. About choosing each other even when no one's watching. She smiled. I'm watching. He laughed. Good. When they returned home, the house felt warmer. The girls greeted them with easy affection. Unburdened by tension, they no longer had to navigate. Life resumed, but differently. Susan noticed Reggie more. Reggie let himself be seen. They argued sometimes. They apologized faster. They laughed more freely. One evening, months later, Susan caught Reggie watching her from across the room. What? She asked. He shook his head, smiling. Just thinking how close we came to becoming roommates who shared kids. Susan crossed the room and kissed him. Not happening. He wrapped his arms around her. No, we chose better. And that was the truth of it. Their marriage hadn't been saved by a grand revelation or a single dramatic change. It had been reshaped by attention, by courage, by the decision made again and again to see each other clearly. Susan Ellis hadn't fallen back in love with her husband. She had finally learned how to love him well. And Reggie Ellis, no longer surviving his life, found himself fully living it, beside the woman who now chose him, every day on purpose.